The first insight about speciation is that it must be common. The diversity of living things is so basic an observation as to need almost no comment, except, yes, we shouldn't be thinking of this as something that happened long, long ago across the earth, and now we're just looking at static results ever since. We should be thinking of this as circumstances that apply quite a lot of the time in an ongoing way. But what is a species? The most common definition that's memorized across scientific pedagogy is what Ernst Mayr called the biological species concept, which is reproductive incapacity, with a couple of caveats that producing hybrids is possible, except that they can't themselves reproduce, or even that perhaps the species can interbreed, but they happen not to in the wild. There's one big problem with the biological species concept. It's not empirically borne out. Sister species, which is to say species who are one another's closest relative, not because of intervening extinctions, but because they literally are each other's closest relative in evolutionary terms, frequently are capable of interbreeding. And they do so in nature, out and about. It may be at the margins of their respective borders, or it may be in a substantial overlap zone. But there's more. There are many different species concepts. One of them is merely practical, and that is simply to say so. We're out collecting bugs, we're out examining creatures, we're sorting through drawers or collections, and we say there's this kind, and there's this kind. This is called alpha taxonomy when you assign those kinds names. It's provisional. It's first glance. It's subject to future work, very likely renaming. That's called revision. And an assessment of the geographic and evolutionary processes by which these different types may have come about. Often revision may include rejoining certain designated groups because we don't think they're separate species after all, or splitting them up. These aren't arbitrary. These are actually the results of the revision analysis. What are the criteria, though, for now, not off the cuff, analytically, theoretically underpinned, for calling this a species and that a species? Sadly, there isn't one. Every different group seems to have its own criteria by which biologists who study that group have settled upon calling the different kinds species. This was called out in a brilliant paper by Mishler and Donahue, which was called A Case for Pluralism. To go ahead and admit that across the vast expanse of the planet and the vast expanse of living things diversity, that designatable types may have come about in different ways. And that biologically what it means to be a different kind of creature for, say, a bunch of mosquitoes may be very different than what it means for a bunch of different algae species. There's nothing terrible about that. The idea that there is, in fact, diversity not just of species, but means of making species and thereby criteria for designating species. That a single definition really isn't a very useful scientific concept.